Stoicism is a way of life consisting of a set of theories and a set of practices, both of which are aimed at producing happiness by reordering our desires so that we desire only that which is consistently attainable, and that is virtue. Stoicism is a tradition in ancient philosophy, beginning shortly after Plato and continuing well into the days of the Roman Empire. As a matter of fact, Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, was himself one of the Stoic philosophers, and his book, The Meditations, is one of the great books in the history of philosophy. The Stoics inherited Plato's academy, or perhaps we should say they took over Plato's academy. Before he died, Plato set up the academy to continue the study of philosophy, to continue and preserve this practice and to maintain his teachings, but the Stoics came along and took it over. The Stoics were philosophers, and they were not exactly like Plato, although not wholly unlike Plato either. The first one was Zeno. Zeno the Stoic is not to be confused with Zeno of Zeno's paradox. Zeno of Zeno's paradox was one of the pre-Socratic metaphysician philosophers. This is a different guy. Zeno the Stoic is later, and he comes after Socrates and after Plato, and he's the first Stoic philosopher and the founder of the school. Later there was Chrysippus, and these are two of the Greek Stoics. And the ones whose texts we're more likely to read, because we still have their books, are Marcus Aurelius, the Roman Stoic from much later, and Epictetus, and Seneca. Seneca is also a Roman Stoic. Epictetus is a bit of a different character. Epictetus is a Stoic living in Roman times, but not exactly Roman. He was a Greek. Epictetus was born a slave, but he died a free man, making him a nice contrast and comparison to Marcus Aurelius. One Stoic is a slave, the other is the emperor of Rome. And Stoicism, as you can see from this, is a philosophy that is meant for human beings. It's meant for any human being and for all human beings. Now, Epictetus apparently wrote nothing down. What we have from him is actually written by one of his followers named Arrian. It's called the Handbook, or the Enchiridion. Now, let's, before we say anything about the text, let's take a third look at Stoicism. First, I said it's this way of life consisting of a set of practices and a set of theories aimed at producing happiness, etc., etc., reordering desire, etc., etc. By the way, Pierre Hadot's book, What is Ancient Philosophy?, is a very good book in explaining how the Stoics and other schools in ancient philosophy are ways of life meant at producing happiness. Now, next I define Stoicism by saying it's this tradition emerging in this era and continuing this far, and including these figures, Zeno, Chrysippus, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, and it's meant to be lived by human beings. It's meant to be livable by all human beings. Well, a little bit else on Stoicism. Let me state, let me introduce Stoicism a third time. The Stoics were materialists, and they said that virtue is necessary for happiness. Now, the Epicureans were one of their major opponents, major philosophical disputes was with the Epicureans. The major, in fact, for quite some time. The Epicureans said that virtue is necessary for happiness also. But the Epicureans thought that happiness is basically rooted in physical pleasures. And the Stoics said physical pleasure has nothing to do with happiness. Happiness requires virtue and virtue alone. For the Epicureans, according to the Epicureans, happiness is the end, pleasure is the end, virtue is a means to the end. In the Stoics, virtue is the means and the end. Virtue is happiness. Virtue is both necessary and sufficient for happiness. The state of virtue and the state of being happy are the same state in the same way of life. Stoicism is the thesis that virtue is the only true good. Other things like a healthy body, money, power, fame, physical pleasures, these are not good things. Now, there's nothing wrong with preferring them. If you have the option of having these things while also being virtuous, that's fine. It's okay to prefer to have these things. They're not to be shunned, but they're not to be confused with happiness. We're not to stake our happiness on them. They are not actually good things. Now, here the Stoics, who claim to be the followers of Plato, although as materialists they had no idea about the doctrine of non-physical reality. They claim to follow Plato, and they got a lot of Plato right. Or at least they got Socrates right, as he's portrayed in Plato's dialogues. Socrates, who will happily sacrifice his life if that is necessary to preserve virtue. Socrates in the Crito and in the Apology is an inspiration for the Stoics, and you can see this when you read Epictetus. Now, Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, gave these teachings which Arian preserved and wrote down. And let's take a look at the very beginning of the text. The first section from the Enchiridion of Epictetus. He says, "Some things are in our control and others not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuits, desires, aversions, and in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, property, reputation, command, and in a word, whatever are not our own actions. The things in our control are by nature free, unrestrained, unhindered, but those not in our control are weak, slavish, restrained, belonging to others. And if you make the mistake of presuming that what is not your own is your own, you will be unhappy. If you think that money, power, fame, physical pleasures, the health of the body are things that are yours and things that are under your control, you will never be happy because they are not under your control and they are not actually yours, and they have a tendency to run away the moment you have them, or to never let you have them in the first place. And if you did have them, you would worry that you would lose them. And if you didn't worry, well, you would just be foolish because you wouldn't realize how unstable these things are. But what is within your control? Your own opinions, your own judgments, your own desires, your own decisions. These are entirely yours, and they are entirely within your control. Understand this, and you will be happier for it. Now, Epictetus, in the Enchiridion, is trying to help us understand this and trying to practice this himself. And you find hundreds of examples of how these thoughts are articulated and how these thoughts are put into practice. For example, there's this delightful little piece of advice where Epictetus says, when someone criticizes you, you should respond in this way. You should say, well, it's lucky he didn't know about my other faults, because he would have mentioned them too if he had. And there's this other practice when you're going somewhere. Don't assume. Don't say to yourself, I'm going to go here and I'm going to do this thing, because then you're going to be upset if something goes wrong. What you should say to yourself is, I'm going to go to this place and I'm going to try to do this thing, and I'm going to be virtuous and maintain self-control. And no matter what happens along the way or what happens there, you will be happy, you will be content. If you restricted your intentions and your expectations and accordingly restricted your desires to that which was within your power, which was simply to be good. So make this contemporary. I'm driving to the store to buy ice cream, and I might say to myself, now I am driving to the store to buy ice cream. And then, on the way to the store, I get stuck in traffic, I get in a wreck, someone bumps his car into mine, I have to stop and exchange insurance information and worry that this guy's insurance won't come through, and I'm going to lose hundreds and hundreds of dollars fixing the damage to my car. And I get to the store, and there's no ice cream. The flavor I wanted was all sold out, and I've lost 2 hours of my life just trying to buy ice cream and I'm very angry. But if all the external circumstances were the same, and I restricted myself to desiring only to be good while preferring to get ice cream, I say to myself, today I'm going to the store. Maybe I'll buy ice cream if circumstances allow, but my goal is to go to the store and be good. No matter what happens on the way to the store, at the store, on the way back from the store, whether I remain good throughout it all is entirely within my control, says Epictetus. And if I restrict my expectations and my desires and my thoughts to that goal, I will be much, much, much happier. So you see all these theories and all these practices that correspond to the theories, and they're all meant to produce happiness. In section 5 and in section 20 of the text, Epictetus tells us what upsets us is not the things that happen to us, but our judgment that they are bad things. So what we should do is we should get rid of the judgment, and then we will be rid of the pain caused by these bad things. And this is how you cope with not only the store being out of ice cream or getting stuck in traffic. This is also how you cope with death, illness, the loss of loved ones, political situations in your country that displease you. This is how you cope with physical pain. This is how you cope with financial problems. This is how you cope with an undeserved bad reputation. The greatest good for a human being is virtue, and it is stable and it is within your control to achieve it, and you shouldn't run after all of these other things. Epictetus says, here is a quote from section 2 of the text, "If you desire any of the things which are not in your own control, you must necessarily be disappointed." Here's section 8. Some of these sections are fairly long, but section 8 is quite short and captures quite a bit of Stoicism in one sentence. "Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do happen, and you will go on well." Change your desires to fit what is. Don't try to change what is to fit your desires. That is not achievable, but you can change your desires to fit what is, and in doing so you will be content. And also, Epictetus' role model, he closes the text by reflecting on his behavior. Socrates. It's not what would Jesus do, it's what would Socrates do. That is another way Epictetus goes about thinking through the theories of Stoicism and putting them into practice. Remind yourself of what is really important. If it's not something you can imagine Socrates in the dialogues of Plato thinking is important, then it's not really important. But you can imagine Socrates thinking virtue is important, so go and be good. And you will be doing what is necessary, and you will be able to achieve happiness by doing this and by seeking only to do this. But go about your affairs and go about your business and try to have things that are not within your control. Try to achieve money, power, fame, and physical pleasures, and care about them rather than about virtue, and you will not be a happy person.